The world has always been full of chaos, and those who had divine blessings became heroes, and defeated enemies remained only participants in an evil organization. It is with one of these dark organizations that our story begins, full of surprises and surprises. The name of this dark organization was the Shadow of Death, and our main character was called Serena. The girl found herself in one of the training centers of this organization and was waiting for her first lesson. She ended up in the 5th training building, which qualified for survival and was not particularly popular. The situation was also aggravated by the severity of the training, because the instructor teaching at the 5th training center was the embodiment of evil. His cruel attitude and caustic glance towards his students elevated him to the status of the most cold-blooded person in the Shadow of Death. He decided to spend his first lesson fighting with recruits and calling one of the girls as a sparring partner. The student, not daring to disobey the order of her instructor, was forced to take a few steps forward and draw her sword. All students in the organization were assigned their own personal number, and the girl with number 23 rushed to attack the teacher. As soon as the girl managed to get close to the instructor, in an instant he managed to parry her attack and knock the sword out of her hand. After which he decided to ask number 23 what exactly her mistake was. But the girl could not say anything in her defense. He decided to turn to a crowd of other students with the hope that someone could give a more accurate answer to his question. Serena raises her hand, acting as a volunteer and explaining that the girl was just mindlessly swinging the sword, and then simply gave up. The instructor is quite happy with this answer, but still tries to achieve greater depth of explanation. Our heroine compliments her answer by saying that you cannot draw your blade if you have no intention of killing your opponent, and while you are standing on your feet you cannot give up. This answer suits the teacher quite well, and he notes that it sounded very good, and then tries to attack Serena. The girl is shocked by surprise, but still manages to react and block the instructor's attack. After their swords clashed, the girl managed to hit the teacher's shoulder with the tip of her sword. At the same time, the instructor's blade ended up at the very neck of our main character, and she was separated from death by a few millimeters. The instructor says that the art of fencing, shadow strike, which they are studying is intended to kill with one blow, so they cannot defend themselves. It was this technique that Serena managed to use to block the blow of the teacher, who noticed that this was her main mistake. He also explained that if their battle had been real, she would have been dead a long time ago, and such a mistake would have cost her her life. On this day, our main character clearly realized the abilities of the 5th instructor of the Shadow of Death, who, after a demonstration battle, sent everyone to train. He also issued a separate personal task for Serena and the very girl who was the first to break ranks for sparring. After some time, the day was drawing to a close, and the students of the 5th educational building were still continuing to train and hone their skills. All this time, our main character was amazed at how frightening and cold-blooded their teacher looked, who was wounded all this time and was simply silently watching them. The girl decides that she should have been more wary of his skills and tried as hard as possible not to anger him. But all this was just an illusion, since in fact the instructor could barely restrain his emotions, experiencing incredible pain and cursing the little annoying girl. Remembering their battles, the instructor is indignant because he is an ordinary third-rate bandit, and in his old days everything was much better. He immediately understands that the girl has very impressive skills and most likely she is a hero who, for unknown reasons, decided to infiltrate an evil organization. Noticing the way the girl smiles, looking at her teacher, he decides that she is mocking him and is sure that she will become a real problem in his life. The man acting as the instructor was named Ronald, who had to make a living as a junior instructor in the Shadow of Death. While he spent time in his thoughts, the students slowly lost consciousness, remaining completely exhausted after such hellish training. Ronald didn't even notice the suffering of his charges because the only thing he was thinking about was the pain in his shoulder, and the desire to get to the first aid station as quickly as possible. In turn, Serena, thinking that a tough and cold-blooded swordsman was standing over her, tried to work as hard as possible in order to appear worthy in his eyes. Ronald continued to curse the girl, saying that he was not paid for overtime in the hope that they would finish soon and he could rest. His thoughts about how he would get to the first aid station and then be able to eat are interrupted by strange sounds emanating from the crowd of interns. Raising his head, he notices how half the students, including our main character, simply fall to the ground from complete exhaustion. He can't believe that the girl was able to hold out for so long, after which he announces the end of today's classes and asks everyone to leave. Ronald realizes that he cannot leave his student just like that and decides to drag her to the dorm, experiencing incredible pain in his wounded shoulder. After some time, having delivered her body to the bed, he wonders how a girl can be so heavy, and also manages to bandage his wounds. Realizing that the girl is unconscious, he decides to verify his theory that she is a hero who is engaged in espionage in their organization. Searching her body and things, he finds various gadgets in the form of throwing knives and vials of poison, wondering whether it is legal to have all this on him. Also in her belongings, he finds a ring with the coat of arms of the famous Reville family of fencers. Realizing that the girl belongs to a noble family, Ronald does not understand what to do next, because since she is his trainee, he too may begin to be suspected of espionage. The man is seriously considering burying the girl somewhere nearby and simply getting rid of her because accidents often occur during the organization's training sessions. At this time, the siren's memories flash through her past life in her home. Our heroine's father is seriously ill, and she is faced with the problem that no one around her can find a worthy doctor to help him. Siren, along with her family, was a member of the secret organization of Free Knights, and her family founded the stone sword, one of the 3 great styles of fencing. However, the harder the rock becomes, the more easily it becomes covered with moss, and over the years the stone sword has become an outdated style. Their family began to gradually fall apart, and the father of our main character sought to pass on his knowledge, but over the years he only got worse. The girl was very worried about her father's condition and wanted to do her best to help him revive the former power of her family. In her thoughts, she comes across the idea that she does not have to become the heir to the stone sword and can learn 3 fencing styles at once. This idea of possessing a stone sword with the fire of war and a shadow strike greatly inspires our main character, and she hurries to share her thoughts with her father. Serena runs through the entire castle to her father's chambers to discuss this hypothesis with him as soon as possible. The girl falls into his arms and begins to tell her newly invented plan when suddenly her speech stops. She falls silent, raising her head up, and her father's bloody hands slide over her tender cheeks. The girl freezes in horror looking at the mutilated and bloodied head of the family, who says that the future of the entire family lies with her. Serena cannot squeeze out a single word, trying to understand how this happened and who betrayed her father. At the same moment, the girl wakes up realizing that it was all just a bad dream, and she needs to rest a little more. Ronald, all this time, waiting for the moment for her to wake up, asks the girl if she belongs to the Reville clan. Serena realizes that her disguise has been revealed and begins to think about a plan on how to escape and hide from persecution. The instructor says that the girl's family fell, and her only descendant came to the villainous organization for an unknown purpose. The girl understands that he is trying to provoke her so that she will give out as much information as possible, and tries to distract attention by throwing shuriken at him. At the last moment, her hand stops because Ronald asks if she has the courage to continue the legacy of her family. He begins to take the sword out of its sheath while explaining why she is still alive, and he did not hand her over to the rest of the organization. Ronald lists 3 fencing styles: stone sword, shadow strike, and flame of war, after which his blade is enveloped in bright scarlet flames. The main character is very surprised that in the organization of the Shadow of Death, one of the instructors is also an undercover person. The girl is very surprised that in addition to her, one of the heirs of the swordsmen in the sect was a descendant of swordsmen. Serena tries to understand what Ronald's motives are, and he, in turn, smiles in the hope that the girl believed his lies and mistook him for the heir of a high family. The teacher's goal is to keep his job and nothing more, so he tries to convince the girl that he independently studied 2 styles of sword fighting and wants to share his knowledge. He says that over the years of training, his style of fighting flames of battle and shadow strike has not been perfected and may have side effects. The girl begins to believe that he is not deceiving her, and all this time he has been looking for a successor who will be ready to withstand such a test and stress. Ronald explains that the girl faces a difficult path, but in fact he is glad that in this way he can get rid of her and keep his job. He invites the girl to improve her style together so that she can continue the history of her family. Siren is in thought because she is not completely confident in the veracity of his words, but still the demonstration of the technique plays into the hands of the instructor. Ultimately, the girl agrees and Ronald, with a calm face, says that difficult trials await her, but inside himself he rejoices, being sure that she will not be able to withstand it. The next day, not far from one of the organization's training centers, our heroes begin their training. Ronald throws leg weights on the ground, saying that for a swordsman, the lower body is the most important and needs to be strengthened. Serena is a little worried that such stress during the training period may negatively affect her progress. The instructor also gives her velvet tree root to improve recovery and a patch for calluses, being 100% sure that all this is necessary in order to strengthen her body. The girl begins diligent and very tough training. After 10 days of such debilitating suffering, at one point her body becomes so weak that she falls and passes out unconscious. Seeing this, Ronald begins to rejoice within himself, without showing emotions, in the hope that the girl has finally gone to the next world. After this incident, the girl was able to come to her senses and continue training, but every week, once again losing consciousness, she rose to her feet and continued, which displeased the instructor. At some point, looking at Serena, it seemed to Ronald that she was actually doing all this on purpose, mocking him and showing her superiority. The instructor could not understand how a person was able to withstand such hellish loads and was worried that he would be discovered and he would lose his job. After a long time of trying to exhaust the girl and realizing that this did not bring tangible results, Ronald began to come up with a new plan. He comes up with the brilliant idea to make it look like this was just the preparatory stage of her training, after which he sends the girl to rest, not understanding how she was able to withstand 2 months of such incredible stress. While he was thinking about how to tighten up his training, he was disturbed by another of the organization's instructors. He says that he saw one student leave his room and explains that there are rumors about some kind of close contact between them. Ronald keeps his cool and says while drinking coffee that he's just giving her training tips and nothing more. His colleague doubts such a primitive excuse and suggests that he actually just fell in love with this girl. Ronald says that this is complete nonsense, and he could never in his life fall in love with some arrogant and juvenile know-it-all. The man says that he did not want to offend him, and these are just rumors and his assumptions from what he saw. In parting, he says that he has no more questions and, leaving the office, quietly steals part of Ronald's notes with important information. The next day, Ronald explains to Serena that each fencing style has its own method, which includes a special individual attack with one blow. The shadow strike is aimed at vital points, the flames of war make a hole in the enemy's defense, and the stone sword causes damage no matter how good the defense is. If you try to combine all these styles together, and it is done by an amateur, then everything can lead to sad consequences for the swordsman. Ronald unsheathes his sword and begins to demonstrate the fusion of the two styles into one very powerful and dangerous technique. He launches several fiery blades towards the girl that cut everything in their path. In the process, he slightly injures his wrist, but does not show it by saying that this move he called the fireworks of red sparks, a mixture of flames of war and shadow strike. He also says that it is a very deadly fencing art containing speed and deception, but its use is close to suicide. Ronald says all this in order to put noodles in her ears, and the siren, completely believing his words, ponders what will happen if this technique is brought to perfection. The instructor says that if you add his technique to the stone ball, you will get a crushing blow capable of destroying everything in its path. But this is still only a theory. He also says that using such a blow will place an incredible burden on the one who uses it, and death can overtake him at any moment. The girl, believing his words, prepares herself to work hard, and Ronald cannot believe that she so easily fell for the words of an ordinary swindler. He believes that combining all three styles is simply impossible for any person, and the girl resolutely says that she will try and make every effort. After exactly a year of training, an instructor reading a newspaper hears dissatisfaction from a girl who does not believe that their training is over. Ronald's sick fantasy imagines the siren as an incredible cyborg, because not one person on Earth, even in theory, could withstand such hellish training, but she is still alive. The instructor says that if she wants to become a true ball master, she needs to do more than just physical exercises. He begins to be annoyed by the siren's intrusiveness and vitality, and he is indignant, not understanding how to get rid of it. The girl begins to sincerely beg him, saying that she was very stupid, and asks him to teach her everything else that is necessary to merge all styles. After this, Ronald begins to overwhelm her with a huge amount of theoretical scientific literature for several months. All his strength goes into trying to overwhelm her with tests and theoretical tests. But every time he runs out of steam and simply falls asleep at work. Leaving the instructor's office one night, Serena is stopped by an unfamiliar voice and asked to explain. Standing in front of her is the third instructor in the organization who, apparently, has been watching her for a long time. The man says that he heard information from the fourth instructor that he and Ronald had become very close and asks for an explanation. The girl tries to justify herself by saying that she studies at the 5th training center and is forced to obey all his orders and train hard. The man asks not to pretend to be a fool and states that he has known for a long time that she is a spy from the Ravelil family. Serena, realizing that her disguise was revealed, immediately grabs her sword, realizing that no one will just let her go. The man also unsheathes his blade, saying that even though she comes from a line of swordsmen, she still cannot compete with him. After which he immediately attacks the girl, and they begin to exchange very fast and powerful blows. At one point, Serena manages to perform a shadow strike and hit the instructor's vital artery. The man falls to the ground from loss of blood, and the girl realizes that she could not calculate her strength because after so many years of training she has become much more resilient and strong. Serena sees the lifeless body of one of the instructors and understands that she needs to escape from the organization as soon as possible and not be captured. Realizing that there is no time and most likely all the other heads of the organization are already aware of her espionage, she immediately leaves the walls of the educational building. The girl hopes that she will have enough time to hide, but after a short period of time, members of the Shadow of Death manage to overtake her. Meanwhile, Ronald wakes up to hear the alarm go off throughout the organization. One student bursts into his office, saying that Serena knocked out the third instructor and escaped because she was a spy and was discovered. The man immediately heads to the scene of the incident and stumbles upon a crowd of onlookers who have gathered near the corpse of the instructor and are discussing the motives of what happened. Ronald understands that if he managed to guess about her espionage, most likely they will begin to suspect him too, and he will fall under the hot hand. He immediately decides to find out from the student who told him all the information in which direction the offender decided to hide. The girl says that the best fighters of the organization have already gone after her, as well as some of the other instructors. Having heard all this, Ronald orders the students to stay inside the educational building and not go anywhere, and he will go in search of the runaway. The girl tries to stop him, starting to outline the order of the deputy head of the organization, but Ronald manages to interrupt her. He looks at the girl with a cold and piercing gaze, saying that he is still her commander and she is obliged to follow his orders. The frightened student, not daring to contradict her captain, leaves, and Ronald, having collected the necessary amount of supplies, sets out in search of his student. After some time, moving in the direction indicated by one student, he stumbles upon several killed members of the Shadow of Death. Looking at all this, he understands that during all this time of training the girl became a real monster and was able to kill so many soldiers alone. He hears a noise nearby and, moving in this direction, stumbles upon a battlefield on which he finds a number of more corpses and realizes that the girl is somewhere nearby. As he examines the bodies of the fallen warriors, he hears the crunching of branches behind him and asks who is hiding in the shadows. From the dark thicket of the forest, Serena's clothes appear, which are completely stained with traces of someone else's blood. The girl begins to draw her blade, saying that she was sure that the instructor would come for her, preparing for the next battle. Ronald says that he could not do otherwise and prepares to defend himself, screaming with fear inside himself and not understanding why she takes out the sword. The girl says that she must repay him for the service rendered and immediately rushes to the attack, thinking that he has come to kill her. Everything happens in the blink of an eye and the blade pierces the man's shoulder, and Serena has a look of surprise on her face. Behind the girl is the second instructor of the organization, whom Ronald managed to wound right in the heart, and thereby save her from being stabbed in the back. The body of the second instructor falls to the ground, and the sword continues to stick out from his chest. At this time, blood flows down Ronald's hand, and he says that the second instructor was let down by his emotions and greed, and that is why he managed to react to his attack. Although he managed to save Serena from certain death, the girl was still able to wound him in the shoulder in the same place as in their first training session. The man gives her a small package containing the most necessary things, as well as a map that will help her get out. Serena, not understanding why the instructor is so kind to her, accepts this parting gift with caution. Ronald asks her not to delude herself, because he is doing this so that she will act as bait, and he, too, can get away. The girl stands absolutely not knowing what to do, and Ronald, at this time bandaging his wound, thinks that she wants to ask him for something else. He decides to give the girl all the accumulated funds that he has in the hope that this will finally make her leave and leave him alone. The girl is amazed by his kindness and, taking all his things away, says that someday he will have a real successor, and she is just a loser. The man simply leaves silently, thinking that he will never again in his life find such a reckless girl ready to sacrifice her life during training. After some time, Ronald, who is on the edge of a cliff, still manages to be overtaken by other members of the Shadow of Death. The first instructor of the organization stands in front of Ronald and says that he will not be able to just leave here alive. The girl draws her blade, saying that she will allow him to leave with dignity and meet death with a sword in his hand. Ronald expresses his gratitude, but at the same time understands that he has received a serious wound and his shoulder will not allow him to fight at his full strength. The girl grins, saying that apparently he was seriously injured in the battle with the second instructor. Ronald calmly says that this will not stop him from fighting to the very end and he will not lose just like that. The first instructor immediately rushes to attack him, and our hero manages to defend himself using the flames of war. Their battle clearly demonstrates that each of the three main fencing styles has its own characteristics. The stone sword style is not subject to any enemy defense as it is capable of completely suppressing it. Shadow strike is excellent for attack and as a weapon for a quick victory, as it wounds the enemy in vital points. Flame of War, on the other hand, harms retaliatory strikes after blocking an attack, causing damage to the attacker and helping to defend more effectively. Each style has its own pros and cons. For example, the Flame of War is weaker than a stone sword that breaks defense, but at the same time, it is strong against direct attack and is the main enemy for swordsmen who use Shadow Strike. Ronald could easily emerge victorious from this battle, but unfortunately the first instructor turns out to be much stronger physically and mastery of the fencing style is not enough. After several minutes of battle, Ronald suffers more and more damage, in addition to an earlier shoulder injury that left him severely weakened. The first instructor holds our hero's impaled body over the cliff and asks forgiveness for having to take advantage of her. Ronald says that he has honor and the defeated swordsman does not need sympathy, adding that an escaped girl will not just leave something like that. Finally, saying that the heir of the rival family will soon go after you first, the instructor throws Ronald's body off the cliff. After a long period of time, night gives way to early morning and Serena still continues to hide from her pursuers. At one point, members of the Shadow of Death organization again overtake her and rush to attack her. After going through countless trainings, the next fighter becomes nothing more than a child's toy for her, and she deals with him very easily. The girl tears off a piece of the defeated enemy's clothing to wipe the blood from her blade, and says that this is already the 30th enemy defeated. Thanks not only to her fencing skills, but also to the survival skills taught to her by the fifth instructor, she manages to stay afloat in the face of a chase. The girl was not immediately able to realize this, because these survival skills were acquired through the daily struggle with death while being on the verge of life. At one point, moving further and further, she finds herself surrounded by a huge number of instructors and other members of the organization. Serena, having analyzed the situation, understands that the first instructor, as well as all the elite swordsmen of the army of the Shadow of Death, managed to overtake her. The first instructor asks the girl to surrender with dignity, and in this case she promises to guarantee her survival. Serena understands perfectly well that they will save her life only to torture her, and then hide her in a dungeon where she will rot for the rest of her life. The first instructor says that, as expected, the fifth successor will not give up so easily, to which Serena completely agrees. She also adds that the girl was the last student of that traitor, and this dead man will no longer be able to take on anyone as a student. The words she hears shock our main character, and she cannot believe that the person who gave her the opportunity to escape died. The first instructor explains that from the very first day the fifth joined the organization, they knew who he really was and wanted to gain his skills. They also say that they also knew everything about her espionage from the very beginning, and having received the maximum from both of them, there is no point in their further existence. Serena cannot believe that her mentor is no longer there and, in despair, tightly grips the hilt of her sword. The first instructor says that he lost a worthy battle, although he was wounded in the shoulder, which is why the fight was not very expressive. Memories pop up in the girl's head that it was she who wounded her teacher, and if not for this, then perhaps he would still be alive. The first instructor begins to slowly unsheath his sword, but suddenly realizes that something crazy is starting to happen. Serena, completely consumed by rage and a fit of madness, begins to kill one member of the organization after another. The girl's skills in battle are on a completely different level, so in a fit of rage, members of the organization do not pose any threat to her. The girl blames herself that in the pursuit of skills and knowledge, she is once again losing those who are very close and dear to her. She says that her destiny is to be born a warrior and become a first-class swordsman who will destroy all enemies in her path. In the afternoon of the same day, somewhere in the forest, a bloodied and wounded Ronald regains consciousness. He immediately begins coughing blood and groaning in pain, forgetting the number of wounds he received in the last battle. Our hero immediately begins to bandage his wounds and take medicine, rejoicing that his plan was a success after all. At the very moment when his body was thrown off the cliff, he hoped that everyone would consider him dead and forget about him. While he was falling down the cliff, he managed to use a parachute and land safely on the ground, which is how he managed to survive. Having finished bandaging his wounds, he hopes that the organization will forget about him, and from that day on he will again have to fight for his life. The only thing that upsets him in this situation is that he lost his job and in his old age he will not be able to receive a pension. At this very time, the wounded and exhausted Serena reaches the very rock on which, in her opinion, her teacher was killed. The girl finds his sword and proudly raises it into the sky and says that she will definitely avenge the death of her mentor. She swears by her sword as long as blood flows in her veins in the name of the legacy of her family, she will continue to improve her skills and will definitely remain alive. All these memories of her past life and how it all began haunted our heroine even in the most remote corners of the world. While the girl was eating, an unfamiliar guy asked her how such a venerable milady ended up in their area. Serena thanks him for the hospitality and such a delicious dinner, listening to the guy's questions about how exactly she ended up here. The girl says that she has been traveling around the continent for many years in search of knowledge, as well as challenges to improve her skills. An unfamiliar guy says that he found a guide for the girl about whom she asked him. Our heroine says that going deep into the jungle alone is quite dangerous, so it seemed reasonable to her to find someone who could accompany her. The guy explains that the danger lurking in the jungle is not the worst thing, because the locals are most afraid of Shikatu. In the imperial language, Shada means ghost, a creature that devours people's hearts and receives incredible power. He unbuttons his shirt and reveals a scar running across his entire body, saying that he is one of the few who managed to survive after meeting him. Analyzing the extent of the damage, the girl comes to the conclusion that the mark from the blow was made by something like a sword and was aimed at vital organs. In her memories, the first instructor of the organization of the Shadow of Death immediately flashes through, because it is her fencing skills that correspond to this. After their conversation, time moves towards night, and the girl still continues to be tormented by memories of her past life. Serena is constantly worried about her past life, and how she managed to escape and hide from the pursuit of the Shadow of Death. In parallel with this, she constantly remembers her father and the mission that she promised to bring into reality and revive her family. As she falls asleep, memories of a white-haired woman capable of controlling ice magic begin to flash through her head. Our protagonist is trying to establish contact with this girl, whose name is Seville, and she calls her a former hero whom everyone admired. Seville explains that she is already tired of playing this role and someday Serena the Heavenly Swordsman will realize this. After all, in the end the hero's worthless life awaits only devastation and disappointment in the journey he has made. Serena says that she doesn't understand what they are talking about, and Seville begins to attack her with ice magic. At this moment, the girl wakes up realizing that it was all just a bad dream, and a poisonous snake is crawling next to her. The girl, as if nothing had happened, throws the poisonous cobra out the window, saying that she is gradually starting to get used to the nightmares. She understands that 3 years have passed since her escape from the Shadow of Death, and during this time many events have happened. All this time, the girl traveled across the continent in an attempt to feed herself, as well as to obtain as much information and skills as possible to improve her sword skills. She had to take on very dirty and low work, including killing legendary and mysterious creatures. But sometimes she was troubled by memories of why the once legendary hero Seville became the leader of the bandits. At this moment, her thoughts are interrupted by a small boy who entered her hut, wondering who needed a guide for the trip. The boy says that his name is Raja and he is the most experienced guide in this village who is happy to help her. Our heroine begins to worry very much, looking at the little boy, and worries that he will not cope with the task. Raja, in turn, begins to convince the girl that although he is very young, his skills are at the proper level. Serena understands perfectly well that she must move on and does not need to pay attention to such small details as the age of her guide, and agrees to the proposal. Meanwhile, in the same village, an unfamiliar boy notices a strange man who exudes anger and hostility with his entire appearance. This man turns out to be Ronald, who, apparently, was able to join another evil organization. He was sent here on another mission, and his initial goal was to get to the 5th village. He begins to think that he needs a guide who can take him through the dangerous jungle to the nearby villages. Lost in his thoughts, he notices how little Raja is going somewhere about his business, and decides to ask who he can talk to on this topic. The boy tells the stranger to go to the local wasteland, where they can help him with this issue. He also begins to boast that even though he is the most experienced guide, unfortunately, he has already been hired and someone else must accompany him. Ronald, with a straight face, listens to all these laudatory statements from the boy, not understanding why he is doing this. Also, in parting, Raja manages to say that there are only 2 guides in the village who can guide him through the jungle, and at that very moment a poisonous snake falls on his head. Ronald, in a panic, immediately manages to throw off the reptile and urgently begins to take the antidotes so as not to die. Looking around, he tries to understand how the snake could end up on his head. He notices the back of a certain girl's head and decides that the locals have become completely insolent. It seems to him that all this was done specifically to get rid of him, but still decides to spare them this time and just continue his mission. At this moment, an unfamiliar guy who is treating Serena to dinner stumbles upon him and asks if the man's health is all right. It seems to him that Ronald has become exhausted and that is why he is lying on the ground, and offers him a tasty and nutritious viper kebab. Our hero looks at this with a straight face, suggesting that everyone around him is simply conspiring and trying to finish him off. A young guy with an incredible smile on his face and absolute good nature praises the kebab and asks to try it. Ronald, in turn, immediately draws his sword, cutting the kebab into small pieces and threatening the young guy. He asks why he decided to mock him and try to feed poisonous snakes to various travelers. The protagonist begins to build theories that they wanted to rob him, or even feed him to wild animals living in the jungle. The young guy immediately begins to make excuses, bowing at Ronald's feet and asking him for forgiveness. He also suggests that the stranger most likely needs a guide since he is clearly a non-native inhabitant of these regions. Ronald begins to smile and decides to take advantage of the current situation by saying that from now on the guy will be his guide. He also begins to threaten the guy with violence, saying that in order to make amends he will have to do whatever he says. The young guy cannot say anything in his own defense because he is very scared and decides to succumb to the provocations of our hero. But sometime after they leave the village, the smile on Ronald's face gives way to disappointment. The young guy turns out to be very inexperienced in this matter, and they both find themselves in the middle of a huge swamp. Ronald immediately begins to blame his guide for everything, and he, in turn, cries, saying that he is not to blame for anything and it's just a coincidence. The protagonist uses a rope as a cable, which clings to nearby trees and with its help tries to get out of the quagmire. The guide turns out to be very naive and decides that this is some kind of magic and the magic rope is helping him. After which he clings to the man's body, asking him not to leave him here alone because he will die in the middle of this swamp. The problems don't end there, and after some time the guy begins to get involved in even more trouble, starting with the destruction of the hive. Or he takes himself and our hero deep into the jungle where the pouring rain begins. At this moment, Raja and Serena are also making their way through the swamps, and he asks her to be as careful as possible. The boy turns around to see if everything is okay with the girl and notices how she is simply moving very quickly on the surface of the water. An incorruptible shock immediately appears on his face because he cannot believe his eyes because this is simply impossible. Our heroine replies that there is nothing complicated about it, and you just need to quickly move your feet, because it's the same as walking on water. And at the same moment, while she was answering his question, the girl hits her head on a beehive and provokes insects. Raja immediately begins to panic, but Serena draws her sword and cuts the insects into small pieces in the blink of an eye. As I make my way further through the jungle, the girl each time comes across various dangers and easily deals with them. Even meeting with various swamp monsters did not pose a serious threat to her life. The boy is very surprised by the girl's skills and thinks that she cannot be an ordinary person. The girl explains that the whole point is the incredible training that she managed to undergo in the distant past. She had to practice her skills on the smallest grains of sand and consume moderate amounts of poisons in order to eventually become a Superman. In addition, our heroine explains that even with all her preparation, the southern jungle is not as easy for her as she would like. After some time of wandering through the jungle, our heroes still successfully reach the second village. Serena notes that the local residents very successfully decided to name their settlements simply by numbering them. Raja explains that because houses are constantly collapsing and residents must move from place to place, it is easier for them to simply number their villages rather than come up with a new name for them. Our heroes decide to stop and have a bite to eat at a nearby establishment, and the girl notices that all the locals seem to be avoiding her. The boy tries to calm her down by saying that everyone is just busy with their own business, and there is no need for them to be distracted. He also explains that hunting competitions between all neighboring villages are coming soon and the local residents are now busy with preparations. Raja also invites the girl to participate in these competitions because they do not have any special requirements for candidates. Serena decides to refuse this offer because she does not see much benefit in hunting competitions in a remote village, and this does not contribute to the development of her skills. All this time, our heroes are being watched from afar by a mysterious woman with a spear, who is clearly up to something bad. Having refreshed themselves and gained strength, our heroes go to the third village, but once at the very entrance they realize that something is wrong. Raja notices that the entrance to the village is completely destroyed and most likely something wrong happened here. The girl takes out her sword and asks the boy to step aside until she checks everything and makes sure the village is safe. Using the flame of war technique, she destroys the remaining debris of the wooden gate to infiltrate the village. Entering the settlement, she notices mountains of corpses, which indicate that a massacre took place in the settlement. Trying to comprehend what happened, she notices that there is someone alive nearby, closely watching her. Our heroine turns around and sees a bloody man standing at full height with a huge knife in his hand holding a human heart. Moments later, he begins to eat a heart that belonged to one of the villagers. Serena realizes that in front of her there is a certain wild creature engaged in cannibalism. She decides not to hesitate and immediately attacks. The stranger turns out to be very strong and manages to dodge the attack, after which he licks the blood of the enemies he defeated from his knife. The girl is completely bewildered about what is happening now and why the stranger is doing this because it is absolutely disgusting. At the same second, a young guy's story flashes through her memories about an ominous spirit that devours people's hearts. The girl assumes that the man has been possessed by an evil spirit and promises to deal with him and continues the battle. The stranger's physical skills turn out to be at a very high level, and while dodging attacks, he manages to seize the right moment for a counterattack. With a powerful blow of his knife, he makes a strong cut on our heroine's ankle, which makes it very difficult for her to move. The girl immediately tries to counterattack, but the stranger uses his acrobatic skills and avoids damage. Our heroine, threatening him with a knife, decides to find out a little more about what is happening, asking if the stranger is afraid to die. Assuming that there will be nothing but dead silence in response, the girl decides to continue attacking her opponent using the flames of war. Using her skills, the girl combines techniques and launches several flying fiery blades at the cannibal. These attacks prove to be quite powerful and manage to deprive the opponent of their weapon by breaking it in half. Taking advantage of his confusion, Serena manages to get close to her opponent and deliver a powerful, crushing attack. The blow hits the target, and our heroine manages to cut off her opponent's left hand, which simply falls to the ground. The man, realizing the hopelessness of his situation, immediately tries to escape and move deeper into the village. The girl immediately begins to pursue him, but notices that he has not gone that far and for some reason begins to delve into the mountain of corpses. She sees him once again pulling out a human heart, saying that he is not a man, but just a savage engaged in cannibalism. The girl once again cannot believe that this is possible, looking at how he simply eats carrion. A few seconds later, the unimaginable begins to happen to his body and the severed arm begins to regenerate. His body is completely restored, and Serena does not understand how he managed to do this without the use of holy and demonic powers. The girl understands that this is not a person in front of her, and besides, her injuries and wounds do not allow her to fight for a long time. At the same time, Raja intervenes in their battle, who decides to emerge from his hiding place and realizes that he has made a mistake. The man immediately grabs the little boy and begins to run deep into the jungle using him as a hostage. Raja begins to ask for help, and the man points towards the neighboring village as if hinting to follow him. Serena realizes that with a wounded leg she will not have time to catch up with her opponent, and decides to immediately follow in his footsteps. Having lost all her supplies as well as her guide, she has no choice but to succumb to provocation and follow to the neighboring village. After some time, Ronald and his guide find themselves at the site of the very village in which the massacre took place. Moving through the destroyed village, our hero wonders if there are any bandits on the mainland capable of committing such a thing. The young guy replies that there are no bandits here while Ronald analyzes the scene of the incident trying to understand what happened here. He understands that the local residents were killed by one person with something very sharp and long, similar to a sword, but he does not understand why there are marks of human teeth on the bodies of the victims. He also understands that there was a clash between two warriors and the opponents turned out to be equal in strength. While our heroes are thinking about what to do next and what to do in this situation, they are interrupted by someone's female voice behind them. The girl says that her name is Aisha and she came from the last fifth village to accompany the guests to their settlement. Our heroes realize that they have no choice and decide to follow the girl while being on guard. They were greeted very cordially and hospitably by all the local residents, but something bothered Ronald. He felt that a strange and incomprehensible ominous aura was emanating from Aish, as if she was not quite an ordinary girl. Ronald orders his companion not to leave him a single step, as something wrong is clearly going on here. The girl reports that they are almost there and leads them to the entrance to a huge hut located in the very center of the village. She looks inside and tells Mr. Elder that guests have arrived and are asking permission to enter. Our heroes go inside and greet the village leader, saying that it is a great honor for them. The elder, imposingly smoking a hookah, asks not to flatter him because he has very little influence on people. Ronald arrived here on behalf of a dark organization in order to recruit the elder into its ranks and makes him a very generous offer. They begin to dialogue, but before agreeing, the old man says that recently a violent animal has appeared in the area, also explaining that if the village's security turns out to be weak and falls, then all its inhabitants will most likely be subject to death. Ronald doesn't understand what exactly the old man wants from him, but he senses that he won't just agree to the offer and some conditions will need to be fulfilled. Memories of the destroyed village and the massacre that took place there flash through his head, connecting this with the old man's story about a certain beast. The elder adds that this all started during negotiations for his entry into the organization, and that it all seems like a very lucky coincidence. Ronald understands that the situation is not taking the most successful turn, and at the same time, it is not for nothing that the organization wanted to have such a villain in its ranks. Realizing that the negotiations are reaching a dead end, he decides to directly ask what exactly the elder wants from him. The old man asks him to take care of this problem, and our hero regards this as some kind of threat to his life. The protagonist agrees to the conditions set, even though he doesn't particularly like this idea because he will have to get his hands dirty. Finally, the elder says that he has very poor eyesight and if something happens, he will not be able to distinguish Ronald from a raging beast. Our hero offers to demonstrate the sharpness of his sword right now so that the old man has no doubts. The elder refuses this offer, asking his guests to enjoy today's banquet because from tomorrow they will both be busy. After their conversation, Ronald and his guide try to escape from this village, realizing that all the local residents want to skin him. The young guy accompanying him says that, apparently, their negotiations have failed and they need to get out of here as soon as possible. Not having time to move so far from the village, a chase begins after them and a huge metal hook flies in their direction. From the neighboring bushes they are also attacked by the same girl with a spear who, apparently, had been watching all the strangers on the mainland for a long time. This girl, accompanied by Aisha, threatens our heroes, asking where exactly they are in such a hurry. Ronald says that he is not going to just enjoy their banquet because he doesn't really like wasting time. The girl with the spear points at our hero, saying that she feels something familiar and very seductive about him. She adds that apparently she saw him in the soul of the devil, and this information greatly surprises Ronald. The accompanying person decides to clarify with our hero what exactly is being discussed, to which he expresses his misunderstanding, saying that the girls are simply crazy. After a short pause, she and her friend rush to attack our heroes, and Ronald is forced to defend himself with all his might. At this time, his escort, being in shock because he had never participated in a battle before, is trying to save his own skin. In the heat of battle, Ronaldo still manages, thanks to his skills, to slightly wound the girl with the spear. But since there are two opponents, and he is alone, Aisha, using her hook, manages to grab him. Her friend, using her spear, manages to throw it towards our hero and wound him in the leg, depriving him of part of his strength. Aisha also wastes no time in injuring him with her iron hook, asking if his life is flashing before his eyes at the moment. The protagonist says that he is not going to just die here, and takes out a bag with an incomprehensible mixture, which begins to emit red acrid smoke. It explodes, causing a sore throat and burning out the eyes of anyone who inhales it. These few seconds of confusion are enough for Ronald to grab his guide and use this as a means of escape. He raises his hand in the air, begins to pronounce a strange spell and asks the invisible entity to give them the opportunity to hide. After which our heroes simply disappear, leaving the girls completely confused and not understanding what happened. The girl with the spear manages to notice that it was most likely magic. This is what she was talking about when she mentioned the soul of the devil. Some time later, closer to night, our heroes manage to break away from the chase and at least take a breath for a while. And all this time Ronald is trying to understand how exactly the girl was able to understand about his abilities. The young guy says that, apparently, the gentleman was somehow able to annoy those people and they recognized him as their enemy. Ronald says that he is meeting them for the first time in his life, and his guide decides to clarify what the demon's soul is and why that girl mentioned it so furiously. Our hero decides to end this conversation, saying that if it weren't for him, the boy would have been dead a long time ago, and this information does not concern him. The protagonist understands that they need to move on. They cannot stand still because they will be pursued by the villagers and they need to go as far as possible. They set off towards the village and decide to reconnoiter the situation, realizing that all the residents have armed themselves and are hunting them. Ronald decides to use the bait as termites and sneak past the village guards undetected, while the local residents, which include that same cannibal man, are distracted by insects. Our heroes manage to slip through unnoticed. At this time, Aisha begins to persuade her friend that they have been looking for escaped strangers for too long, and she wants to rest. The girl with the spear orders everyone not to sleep because intruders may appear at any moment, and they need to brew red fruit tea to overcome the desire to sleep. She also adds that she will definitely make Ronald go through the hell that they went through, while at this very moment our heroes are carefully making their way deep into the village. The whole night passes at this pace and Ronald and his guide are shocked that they have the strength to look for them for so long. The protagonist comes up with a much harsher measure of distraction and decides to start a fire in the village to distract the local residents. Meanwhile, Serena also falls under the hot hand, and the locals begin to hunt for her, assuming that she is connected with those strangers. The girl manages to escape from pursuit, but she understands perfectly well that the southern jungle in which she finds herself is simply merciless, and there is real chaos among people here. She managed to realize that each village must provide a certain number of people as an offering, and all the villages in the area are just farms for cannibals. While Serena is trying to hide, she notices that the area is beginning to be in turmoil due to the fire that occurred, and the girl decides to take advantage of the current situation. Realizing that someone was able to start a fire, she decides not to waste time and take advantage of the situation to enter the village and save her guide. Having made her way inside the settlement and thoroughly searched everything, she finds a boy lying on a table in one of the huts and hurries to save him. Having gone inside, she is immediately attacked by the same cannibal man, with a giant knife, who is already her opponent. The girl manages to react to his attack and defend herself from several powerful attacks in her direction. after which other local residents armed with spears appear from an ambush, and our heroine realizes that all this was planned in advance. The girl begins to be rapidly attacked by several people, and she struggles to defend herself against the numerical advantage of her opponents. But in the end, even the numerical advantage is not able to repel such a powerful swordsman as Serena, and she manages to deal with several enemies. Taking advantage of the effective surprise, a man with a knife attacks her from behind, hoping to finish her off with one blow. Our heroine manages to react, and use the Shroud of Red Flame technique to defend herself and try to escape. A powerful stream of fire throws her opponents back, and also destroys one of the walls of the hut in which the battle took place. Taking advantage of the moment, the girl grabs the little boy in her arms and tries to leave the settlement as soon as possible. But at the same second, little Raja takes out a long blade from his bosom and tries to attack our heroine, who manages to dodge the attack. The boy says that now he understands perfectly why the girl is called a divine knight, because her skills are beyond human understanding. Raja apologizes for the inconvenience, and decides to introduce himself again, saying that he is the leader of the first village. After hearing this, the protagonist still manages to escape into the jungle and hide from pursuit for some time until nightfall. The girl finds herself in a very difficult position, trying to find a way out of this situation, because she cannot hide indefinitely. She is also haunted by the same fire, which, in her opinion, happened for a reason and someone started it on purpose, apparently also being captured by the cannibals. Also, the person who started the fire used a special sleeping pill called a loop on local residents, which also played into Serena's hands. This sleeping pill helped the girl kill Aisha and several other local residents who were hunting for her in the jungle. Our heroine understands perfectly well that games of hide and seek cannot last indefinitely, and she needs to put an end to it. At this very moment, Raja finds her, saying that they are going to end their hunt, because the prey has been at large for too long. The girl says that she is not going to just give up because she has already managed to get rid of several local residents, and they will not be able to break her just like that. The head of the village declares that this is natural selection, and if they died at her hand, it means they were simply weaker. Our heroine does not understand how one can treat living people this way and use them as things, without any idea for what purpose they needed to die. A girl with a spear rushes to attack her, answering that in their region everything is determined by strength and whoever turns out to be stronger is right. A battle begins between them, and it seems that everything around them begins to emit a huge amount of energy from the collision of their weapons of battle. Serena has to defend herself from several opponents at once, which begins to exhaust her greatly. At this very time, somewhere in the depths of the jungle, Ronald and his companion are setting up a small camp. While eating his dinner the guy notices the swordsman's skills and his ability to use the environment to make various gadgets. But still, the young guy is tormented by doubts about what they have to do next, and in response to his question he receives the answer that they will again go to the fifth village. This causes an incorruptible shock to the guide because he does not understand why they should go again to the place where every resident wants to destroy them. Ronald replies that in any case, he needs to complete his business and complete negotiations, so the guide will act as bait. The next morning, the young guy is the first to go to the fifth village, without hiding his presence as he looks absolutely harmless. He makes his way to the elder's hut, who greets him by saying that he has been waiting for his dear guests for a long time. The old man says that the boy is not to blame for anything and the responsibility lies with the unexpected guest who dragged him back and forth. The boy tries to say that Ronald is not a bad person and is very good by nature, but at the last moment he realizes that he could be executed for this. The elder calms the boy down, saying that he will be freed from the hunt, and he just needs to give out the location of that same man. At that very second, their conversation is interrupted by someone's voice, who asks who exactly they are talking about and who the villagers are looking for. The elder looks towards the front door, noticing Ronald standing, who independently decides to show himself. He does this only to distract the elder's attention, after which he immediately begins to run away, acting as bait. The old man immediately begins to pursue our hero, and for some reason the young accompanying man decides to follow in his footsteps. After some time, the elder still manages to overtake our protagonist, and ask him why he started all this. Ronald says that all this time he followed his orders and his actions were aimed only at capturing the beast. The elder says that he is very impatient, and considers our hero useless, and it would be best for him to die. Our hero agrees with this statement and his willingness to accept his fate, but finally takes a detonator from his pocket and presses the button. A powerful explosion occurs that destroys the wooden dam holding back the huge pressure of water, which begins its march through the village. The elder begins to completely drown in the water, like the entire village of which he leads, and Ronald, grinning, offers to continue hunting for him. The protagonist doesn't really like the current state of affairs because he hoped to wash away the old man along with the entire village, but apparently he turned out to be much more tenacious. At this time, the elder begins to use magic, casting spells and summoning the Lord of the Wind. He concentrates a huge amount of air energy at one point and attacks Ronald with a huge and powerful stream of wind, demolishing everything in its path. Our hero manages to dodge the attack, but if not for his innate reflexes, not the slightest piece would be left of him. The old man begins to pursue Ronald and engages him in close combat with swords, as he has very impressive skills, seasoned over the years. Looking at our hero, the elder says that he knows about his presence in the soul of the devil because one of his subordinates whispered to him about it. Some time earlier, Serena still manages to repel the inhabitants who attacked her and defeat the girl with a spear. But despite all this, the enemy's numerical advantage still bears fruit, and she begins to slowly run out of steam and receives more and more damage. The girl decides to use a very powerful technique in combination with the Flame of War to attack the most annoying and nasty opponent in the form of a little boy attacking her from afar. A huge man cannibal comes to the defense of his master, acting as a human shield. He takes the entire blow upon himself, and his lifeless body simply falls to the ground like a dead weight. Trying to take out his rage right there, Roger rushes to attack Serena, but the girl, without any problems, inflicts many cutting wounds on the boy's body. The girl emerges victorious from this battle, saying that according to their laws she was stronger, and therefore, her position is much more significant than theirs.